Three kids are sleeping in the back room of a small cabin in the mountains of Northern California. Down the hall, their mother, their brother, and their brother's friend are being tortured to death. And the kids in that room, they don't wake up. They don't hear a thing. Or at least, that's what they told police. 44 years later, this case is still open. And the reason it's still open might be the most disturbing part of the whole story. This is the Keddie Cabin Murders. Keddie, California isn't really a town, it's more like a memory of one. Tucked into the Sierra Nevada mountains, it was built around a railroad stop, and by 1981 it had maybe a few dozen year-round residents. The kind of place where everybody knows everybody's car, everybody's dog, and everybody's business. In 1979, a woman named Sue Sharp packed up her 5 kids and left Connecticut. She'd just separated from her husband, and her brother lived out in Northern California. So that's where she went. Fresh start, new state, new life. By the fall of 1980, Sue and her kids had settled into a rental, Cabin 28 at the Keddie Resort. It was bigger than the trailer they'd been in, and it needed to be. She had 5 children with her. John, 15, Sheila, 14, Tina, 12, Rick, 10, and Greg, just 5 years old. On the surface, life in Keddie was quiet. Small town quiet. The kind of quiet that makes what happened next feel almost impossible. Here's the setup you need to hold on to, because every detail is going to matter. The night of April 11th, 1981, Sheila, the 14-year-old, is sleeping over at a friend's house next door. Her older brother John and his buddy Dana Wingate, 17, head into town for the evening. And back at Cabin 28, Sue is home with 3 of her kids, Tina, Rick, and Greg, plus a neighbor boy named Justin Smart, who's staying over. Nothing unusual. A regular Saturday night in a town where nothing ever happens. The next morning, April 12th, Sheila walks home to grab a change of clothes before church. She opens the door to Cabin 28, and what she sees will stay with her for the rest of her life. Her mother, Sue, her brother, John, and John's friend, Dana. All 3 beaten and stabbed to death, bound with medical and electrical tape. The living room looks like a slaughterhouse. There is blood on the walls, blood on the furniture. This wasn't quick, and it wasn't quiet. Sheila's 12-year-old sister, Tina, is nowhere in the house. But here's the detail that makes your skin crawl every single time this case gets told. In the back bedroom, just down the hall from where 3 people were being murdered, Sue's 2 youngest sons, Rick and Greg, along with the neighbor boy, Justin, are found completely unharmed, sleeping or pretending to sleep through one of the most violent crime scenes California has ever recorded. They say they heard nothing. Nothing at all. Investigators would spend the next 4 decades trying to figure out if that's actually true, or if one of those boys knew a lot more than he was letting on. For 3 years, Tina Sharp is simply gone. No trace, no leads. Her name sits in a missing persons file while the rest of her family's murder investigation stalls out completely. Then, in April 1984, someone collecting bottles in the woods near Camp 18 in Butte County, nearly 100 miles from Keddie, stumbles onto part of a human skull. It's Tina's. More bones turn up in the area. The discovery finally confirms what everyone feared. This wasn't a triple homicide. It was 4 murders. And whoever did this didn't just kill Tina. They drove her remains almost 100 miles away and left her in the woods like she was something to be disposed of, not someone to be found. One retired sheriff put it about as bluntly as you can. Killing 3 people and leaving them in a cabin to be discovered is one thing. But going out of your way to make sure a 12-year-old girl is never found, that tells you there was something about Tina, something the killer could not risk anyone finding out. To this day, nobody knows what the something was. So, who did it? Investigators zeroed in on 2 men almost immediately. Marty Smart, the stepfather of Justin, the boy who survived the night in that back bedroom. And his friend, a man named John Bo Bubede, who'd been crashing at the Smart place for just over a week before the murders. The motive investigators leaned into was almost soap opera simple. A love triangle. The theory goes that Marty Smart and Sue Sharp were having an affair and that Sue had been encouraging Marty's wife, Marilyn, to leave him, telling her she deserved better. When Marty found out, the theory says he recruited Bo, a man with alleged organized crime connections, to help him deal with Sue permanently. Marty Smart told police he was missing a hammer around the time of the murders. That hammer didn't surface again until 2016, 35 years later. Fritzel pulled out of a pond just down the road from where Cabin 28 used to stand. Investigators believe it was deliberately hidden there. And then there's the letter. After the murders, Marty wrote to his wife, Marilyn. In it, he said something along the lines of, he'd paid the price for her love, and now he'd bought it with 4 people's lives, and asked what more she could possibly want from him. Marilyn says she never actually received that letter. She only learned about it after police found it during the reopened investigation, but she did confirm one thing. It was in her husband's handwriting. Marty passed a polygraph test about the murders. Bo Baubede was quietly protected from deeper scrutiny by state investigators for reasons nobody has ever fully explained. Both men are dead now. Neither was ever charged. Here's where this case stops being just tragic and starts being genuinely infuriating. In May of 1981, just weeks after the murders, Marty Smart reportedly confessed to a counselor. According to that counselor, Marty said he killed Sue and Tina but had nothing to do with the boys. That confession got passed up to the Department of Justice. They dismissed it, called it hearsay, filed it away. Then, in 1984, right after Tina's remains were finally found, Butte County investigators got an anonymous phone call, a voice asking if anyone had ever thought about connecting the Keddie murders to the 12-year-old girl's remains that had just turned up. Whoever made that call knew things about the case that weren't public knowledge. That call was recorded, and then it disappeared into evidence storage for almost 30 years. Forgotten, unheard, until a detective named Mike Gamberg rediscovered the tape sealed in old case files in 2013. 3 decades, a confession dismissed as gossip, a tip recorded and then buried in a filing cabinet. A hammer sitting in a pond the whole time. This is why people in Keddie still use the word cover-up. Now, here's where it gets current. In 2016, investigators re-examined a piece of medical tape recovered from the crime scene back in 1981. The same kind of tape used to bind the victim's hands and feet. Back then, DNA testing didn't even exist yet as a forensic tool. It wouldn't become standard until 1985, a full 4 years after this crime happened. But that tape had been preserved, and in 2018, Detective Gamberg announced that DNA recovered from that tape matched a known living suspect. Not Marty Smart, not Bo Baubede, someone else, someone who, as of that announcement, was still alive and had never been publicly named. The case remains open. The Plumas County Sheriff's Office has said more than once that they believe they're closer than ever to finally closing it. But closer than ever has now been the story for almost a decade. So let's go back to that back bedroom. 2 little boys and a 12-year-old neighbor kid sleeping through the murder of 3 people in the next room in a small cabin with thin walls in a town where sound travels. Justin Smart, the stepson of the primary suspect, gave investigators sketches based on his description of men he claimed to have seen that night, but he also gave conflicting accounts. At different points, he said he witnessed part of what happened. At other points, he said it might have just been a dream. He was 12 years old, traumatized, and his own stepfather was one of the 2 men suspected of committing the murders in the next room. Nobody has ever been able to fully untangle what Justin actually saw, what he was told to say, or what a terrified kid's mind does to protect itself after something like that. That's the piece of this case that never lets go. Not the hammer, not the letter, not even the DNA. It's the idea that the truth of that night might have been sitting in a 12-year-old's memory the entire time. And that memory was never going to be reliable enough or safe enough for anyone to fully trust. Cabin 28 was torn down in 2004. The town of Keddie is even smaller now than it was in 1981. But the case isn't closed. Detectives say they have DNA. They say they have a living suspect. They say they're closer than ever. They've been saying that for years. Somewhere out there, someone knows exactly what happened inside that cabin on April 11th, 1981. And as long as that person is alive and free, this isn't history. It's still an open case. If you want part 2, the DNA suspect they still haven't named, and what Sheila Sharp has said about the investigation since, let me know in the comments and subscribe so you don't miss it.